everyone, and welcome to our May 2024 Public Forum topic analysis on the topic Resolved. Latin American countries should prioritize intra-regional trade over international trade. My name is Taylor Mittelstedt. Currently, I'm the PF coach at Phoenix Country Day School in Phoenix, Arizona. I'll be coaching the PF Lab at SWISD this summer, and I'm also a staff writer for Champion Briefs, working on the Public Forum debate briefs every month. Make sure to check out Champion Briefs for hundreds of pages of research and cards to help you out with each topic. It's an awesome starting point for your research. We'll be broadly covering a small portion of what you might expect to see in that brief during today's topic analysis, so let's get into it and give you a sneak peek. Like I mentioned earlier, the topic for May is Resolved. Latin American countries should prioritize intra-regional trade over international trade. Today, we're going to go over some framing and definition stuff, as well as the primary affirmative and negative arguments I think you're likely to see on this topic. So, let's start with some definitions and framing. First and foremost, I think it's super important to understand context and what this resolution is really asking us. We are really debating whether intra-regional or international trade is better. This month, it's just within the context of Latin America. So knowing that, the buzzword you should be familiar with and aware of is protectionism. This is something you might have heard about in your history classes. If not, it refers to government policies that restrict international trade to help domestic industries. These policies are usually implemented with the goal of improving economic activity within a domestic economy, but they can also be implemented for safety or quality concerns. Generally speaking, the advantages that come with protectionism are encouraging the growth of new infant industries, safeguarding those already existing domestic industries, allowing for strategic development and security, and also promoting job creation. The disadvantages that come with protectionism are that prices tend to rise due to limited competition in the market. It restricts access to foreign markets. It can lead to trade wars and strained international relations, and it stifles innovation in technological processes. The arguments we will look at today generally fall within these categories, but they'll be a little bit more specific to Latin America and in the resolution that we're working with. I know in PF we don't do plans, so we won't know the specific mechanisms by which protectionism is occurring under this resolution, but knowing what we're really debating will help you in finding the necessary literature for this topic and really understanding what you're reading. If we look at the actual resolution, I think definitions are pretty straightforward, and that's really nice. I don't know about you, but I hate debates that come into semantics. They're boring. They don't allow you to use your prep. No one's happy. It's just he said, she said. Judge isn't happy either. Thankfully, I think that's super unnecessary with this topic. The one thing I will point out that I think is a little funky is this idea of intra-regional versus international. Technically speaking, any trade outside your country is international. So intra-regional trade falls into the neg ground a little bit. If you had that inkling, like I know some of my debaters would, please don't lean into it. Don't be that person. Be charitable with your definition on this one to make for a cleaner debate with better clash. I think it's going to benefit everyone in the long run. On a broader framing note, I would stick to an assumed cost-benefit analysis framework. I don't think it's worth spending a bunch of time in your case on framing. I don't really see it being strategically advantageous this time around, at least not with the arguments we're going to discuss today. I guess I can see a world in which you would use a minimizing structural violence framework with arguments about like alleviating poverty or minimizing labor violations. But I don't see you being able to create a case that is both long enough and strong enough to be able to justify that kind of framework. So honestly, just use severity weighing for those impacts and you should be fine. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the AF arguments that I think you're most likely to see on this topic. First, I foresee economic stability being the biggest argument on the AF. Right now, economic conditions in Latin America aren't great. There's a number of ways to develop the uniqueness around that argument. I predict that most people are just going to say that Latin American countries are developing nations. That necessitates economic development and growth. There's a lot of evidence that intra-regional trade supports the development of these economies. This comes in the form of both infrastructure building, but also economic activity. And you're going to find a bunch of academic literature to this effect, which is great. But also look into intra-regional trade in Asia and Africa. These are case studies, so they'll provide historical precedents and they'll be useful for probability weighing. I think they can be really strong on the F. I think the next argument that's going to be really big is transportation, and I can see this being used in two key ways. First is lowering costs. By trading intra-regionally, you are necessarily trading over shorter distances. So if you stay within Latin America, your trade is just overland between countries that are nearby. There's no overseas travel. There are a couple of impacts that can arise from this argument. Namely, this will lower transportation costs. If your goods have to go a shorter distance, you won't have to pay as much for transportation. I think the impact's pretty obvious, but it'll be really important to terminalize it. And what I mean by that is you need to bring the impact down to the human level and tell me what lower transportation costs actually mean to you and me. Like, where does the saved money go? Does it help transportation companies that will then create jobs? Does it improve GDP and improve the quality of life of its citizens? Many debaters stop at the tagline of the impact, that internal link, but this makes it impossible for a judge to see what voting on the impact really means. I think we're also going to see transportation impacted out to the environment. By traveling these shorter distance, there'll be a lower environmental impact. And I guarantee you teams will impact this out to extinction. I think that's fine, but only if you have a more probable impact buried in your impact scenario too, such as like premature deaths from climate change due to air pollution. I think that's going to be really important. Finally, I think your most strategic argument would be that intra-regional trade is a prerequisite to international trade. So we have to do intra-regional trade first. Basically, the argument would be that Latin America lacks trade infrastructure in the status quo. So that's things like roads, channels, businesses, etc., involved in facilitating the commerce between countries. The lack of this infrastructure is bad because it prevents Latin America from reaping the full benefits of international trade. Thus, building this trade infrastructure through intra-regional trade is a prerequisite to engaging in international trade and accessing the full breadth of the impacts the neg tells you. The unique thing with running this argument is that it would almost act as a spike, so kind of a defensive argument that only gets implicated when you link into your opponent's case. It's like running a turn in constructive. So I think this would be cool, but you would likely need to run practice rounds to do something like this and execute it well. That's what I have for you on the ask. Now let's jump over to the arguments that I think are going to be most prevalent on the neg. These are arguments that say Latin America should not prioritize intra-regional trade over international trade. I would say that on the neg, you're either advocating for prioritizing international trade or you are advocating for an equal distribution between intra-regional and international trade. The reason I make this note is because I don't want you to pigeonhole yourself into advocating for only international trade. I think you can kind of advocate for a mixed bag. So with that, I think the biggest argument will be developing economies. There is a lot of evidence that shows that international trade has a positive impact on the economies of countries that engage in it. And this is because international trade allows countries to expand their markets and access goods and services that they otherwise might not have had available to them. It specifically helps developing countries by providing the funds and incentives to build trade infrastructure within the country. And it allows these countries access to the global economy, which is really good because it encourages foreign direct investment into these countries, further benefiting their development. I can see this being impacted out in a couple of different ways. First, alleviating poverty. This impact scenario can be taken out to improving quality of life, saving lives. It literally allows you to do weighing under really any framework, so I think it's a strong impact. Second is just like generally improving the economy. I really think that this leads itself to alleviating poverty once you make your way down the link chain. But I'm sure teams will stop at just like increasing GDP, increasing household incomes. Just be sure to ask them what that really means. You want to make sure you understand their impacts on a human level so you can be really effective in your weighing. Plus, if the judge doesn't know what it means, it makes it harder for them to vote for it. I see this being the biggest argument on the neg because there's just so many pieces of evidence that lend themselves to creating it. And with that in mind, I think you need to be prepared with blocks for all variations of this argument. I think another strong argument is preventing conflict. The idea here is that trade tends to pacify relations between states because it raises the opportunity cost that's associated with engaging in conflict by creating a vested interest in both countries. And so both of them then prefer peace to war. Put more simply, hurting a trade ally hurts you too, so you're less likely to want to do it. Obviously, there's going to be economic impacts here. Hurting trade can hurt GDP, which can hurt household incomes, which hurts quality of life, and in some way or another can link to poverty. Again, this is one of those impacts where you need to terminalize, take it down to the human level, and really tell me what voting for you means. Otherwise, it's just some nebulous economic statistic. But it's not debate if you don't start running crazy war impacts. My guess is people will pull from old great power competition cards to say that not having international trade with the high levels of geopolitical tensions that exist will lead to both conventional war and nuclear war. Two things here. One, look at the evidence that is being read to you, call for the cards, make sure that they're truly applicable to the situation you're talking about. But two, remember that nuclear war isn't probable. So if you're running it as an impact, be sure to have the conventional war impact first that breaks into nuclear war. That way you can drop it and go for the conventional war impacts if your opponents make strong probability analyses on the argument. Finally, I think you may see some arguments about innovation. There are a couple of links into this. First, trade influences technological change by creating a larger market with more intense competition. That's important because competition is a key driver of innovation. And in more open and competitive markets, firms are driven to adopt more efficient production processes, and then they offer their new and improved products and services to customers. Competition is really good for consumers, and this is super logical because it makes these innovations more accessible through both quantity, so greater supply, and lower prices. This is a mini impact in and of itself, so that's kind of nice to have in your pocket. The second way I see the link coming through is through the knowledge transfer that occurs with international trade. It allows countries that might not have been able to innovate previously to start doing so. And that's important because technological progress is a key driver of improvements in incomes and standards of living. There are about a bajillion impacts that can come off of innovation. They could be as simple as innovation to trade infrastructure, which can create economic benefits, environmental benefits, or really anything else. But they could also be more complex and like less closely linked, I guess. Once you link to innovation, the possibilities are kind of endless. Recently, I've heard most people linking innovation to medical innovations or other like scientific discoveries. So the choice is really yours there. Now, that is all of the arguments I have for you. Hopefully you got a little bit of an idea of where to start your cases. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. I always like to search through like debate social media when we're coming across a topic when it first comes out. So our debate, we love that. Generally, it seems like people are preffing neg for this topic. NCFL is making neg speak second at their tournament, so do be aware of that. I think that's some of the reason that people are preffing neg. Personally, I also like neg because I think you're able to engage in a combination of intra-regional and international trade on that side of the ballot. And in my eyes, that would be the best bet. Plus, it allows you to make some strategic concessions, and that's really nice. It gives you less ground to defend. At the end of day, though, I do see adequate ground on both sides of the debate. And with proper prep, I think you should be fine either way. I think what's going to be super important here is really having good topic knowledge, but also having knowledge of the way your case is constructed and being strategic in that. Because I think this is a resolution where it's not going to be like two totally different arguments on each side. I think it's like linking into the same impacts on both sides and really going to come down to some strong weighing. You need to know evidence well so that you can call things that aren't maybe right or being implicated wrong. You need to be able to kind of know what people are going for ahead of time and really have a game plan for how to address them. If you do the proper preparations, you're going to be absolutely fine on both AF, both neg, first, second. You'll be fine either way. So those are my thoughts. That brings us to the end of our time together. If you liked this topic analysis, be sure to check out this month's edition of Champion Briefs for more prep and in-depth analysis. We've got some cool stuff that's coming out of there. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck debating.